Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to break down metabolic alkalosis. This is a topic that often feels intimidating on the wards, but we're going to simplify it into a practical framework. 2 buckets, 1 lab, and 1 unifying concept. Before we begin, this content is intended solely for medical education and is not intended for direct patient care. Always verify with your institutional protocols and current clinical practice guidelines before making any clinical decisions. First, is metabolic alkalosis actually dangerous? Mild to moderate cases are usually asymptomatic. However, the red flag you need to watch for is a pH of 7.55 or higher, which is associated with significantly increased mortality in critically ill patients. Why do symptoms occur? Alkalemia shifts calcium onto albumin, leading to ionized hypocalcemia. This can manifest as paresthesias and muscle twitching, and in severe cases, tetany and arrhythmias. Keep a close eye on 2 high-risk scenarios: patients with cirrhosis where alkalemia drives ammonia across the blood-brain barrier worsening encephalopathy, and patients with Bartter-Gittleman or chronic diuretic use where concurrent low magnesium increases the risk of severe symptoms. To understand metabolic alkalosis, you only need to understand one unifying concept: the final common pathway. The rule is that metabolic alkalosis is maintained by mineralocorticoid effect. The twist is that this effect can be real, as in Conn syndrome, or effective, as in heart failure, cirrhosis, or vomiting. There are 2 phases. The generation phase is the initial loss of hydrogen and chloride ions, such as from vomiting or diuretics. But the maintenance phase is where aldosterone drives distal sodium reabsorption, which is obligatorily coupled to potassium and hydrogen secretion. This is why hypokalemia accompanies most metabolic alkalosis, and why correcting potassium is part of most treatment plans. We'll cover the exceptions shortly. So, how do we approach a patient with metabolic alkalosis? We use 1 lab test to sort them into 2 buckets. That lab is the spot urine chloride. If the urine chloride is less than 20 milliequivalents per liter, the kidney is holding on to chloride. This is bucket 1, chloride-responsive, which is fundamentally a volume problem. If the urine chloride is greater than 20, the kidney is wasting chloride. This is bucket 2, chloride-resistant, which is a hormone or electrolyte problem. A quick pearl: why do we check urine chloride and not urine sodium? Because sodium gets dragged out with bicarbonate in volume-depleted patients, making it unreliable. Chloride tells you the true story of the patient's volume status. Let's look at bucket 1, the chloride-responsive state, where urine chloride is less than 20. The classic case is vomiting, which causes a direct loss of hydrochloric acid. Pathophysiologically, volume depletion activates the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, and the kidney reabsorbs sodium, chloride, and bicarbonate to defend the circulation. Other causes include NG suction, remote diuretic use, laxative abuse, post-hypercapnia, and cystic fibrosis. A physiological pearl here is paradoxical aciduria. You will often see an acidic urine pH around 5 despite systemic alkalemia, because the kidney is desperately trying to hold onto sodium by secreting hydrogen ions. And at the bedside, always look for the surreptitious vomiting triad: dental erosions, parotid swelling, and knuckle calluses. Treating bucket 1 is straightforward. Normal saline plus potassium chloride. Restore the volume, replace the chloride, and the kidney dumps the excess bicarbonate. But what if you can't give normal saline? This brings us to the cardiology exception. Consider a patient with heart failure or cirrhosis who simply cannot tolerate volume expansion. The alternative here is to give potassium chloride without saline plus acetazolamide, which blocks proximal bicarbonate reabsorption. However, remember 3 caveats with acetazolamide. First, it is less effective in profound volume contraction. Second, it causes potassium wasting, so you must monitor and replete potassium. And third, it is relatively contraindicated in kidney failure due to the risk of neurotoxicity. Now let's talk about diuretics, which can be tricky. Why do they cause alkalosis? Comes down to stoichiometry. Loop diuretics block the Na-K2Cl cotransporter, meaning you lose twice as much chloride as sodium. Thiazides block the Na-Cl cotransporter in a 1:1 ratio, causing a milder alkalosis. The key is the anatomy. Downstream from the diuretic block, The kidney can reclaim sodium via the ENA-C channel in the collecting duct, but it cannot reclaim chloride. The result is disproportionate chloride loss, which increases the strong ion difference and drives the alkalosis. Diuretics also create a timing trap, where the same patient can flip between our two buckets. When the drug is active, the kidney is wasting chloride, so the urine chloride is high, greater than 20. They look like they belong in bucket 2. But when the drug has worn off, the patient is volume depleted. The kidney conserves chloride, and the urine chloride drops below 20. They flip to bucket 1. The clinical pearl here is that wide swings in urine chloride across serial checks are virtually diagnostic of surreptitious diuretic abuse. Always ask exactly when the last dose was given. Now let's move to bucket 2, the chloride-resistant state where urine chloride is greater than 20. Your next question must be, is the patient hypertensive? If yes, you are looking at mineralocorticoid excess. We group these into 3 categories. First, aldosterone excess, which includes Conn's syndrome, reninoma, and glucocorticoid-remediable aldosteronism. Second, cortisol excess, including Cushing's syndrome and ectopic ACTH. And third, tubular or channel mimics. These have an aldosterone-like effect without actual aldosterone, such as Little's syndrome, licorice ingestion, and apparent mineralocorticoid excess syndrome. A high-yield callout, ectopic ACTH, classically from small cell lung cancer, is a potent cause. The cortisol levels overwhelm the 11-beta-HSD2 enzyme. The classic clinical picture is a smoker with weight loss, hypertension, and profound hypokalemic alkalosis. If the bucket 2 patient is normotensive or hypotensive, we look at genetic mimics and severe deficiencies. There are 4 main causes here. First, active diuretics. The patient is currently under the effect of a loop or thiazide. Second, Bartter and Gittleman syndromes, which are genetic mimics of permanent loop and thiazide diuretic use. Third, severe hypokalemia, usually a potassium under 2. This impairs tubular chloride reabsorption and will not respond to saline. It requires potassium repletion. And fourth, severe hypomagnesemia, which drives refractory hypokalemia. The critical pearl here is that you must replace magnesium before potassium, otherwise the potassium simply won't stay corrected. Briefly, there is a third mechanism outside of our 2 buckets, the alkali load. This is Calcium-Alkali syndrome, formerly known as milk alkali syndrome. The classic picture is a patient taking high-dose over-the-counter calcium carbonate for osteoporosis or reflux. Look for the classic triad: hypercalcemia, acute kidney injury, and metabolic alkalosis. The treatment is to stop the offending calcium agent and provide 4 fluids with careful monitoring. Let's summarize this into a practical 3-question framework you can use on the wards. Question 1. Is the pH 7.55 or higher? If yes, treat urgently. Question 2. What is the spot urine chloride? If it's less than 20, it's a volume problem. Treat with normal saline and potassium chloride. If it's greater than 20, it's a hormone or electrolyte problem, which leads to question 3. Is the patient hypertensive? If yes, think mineralocorticoid excess. If no, think active diuretics, Bartter or Gittleman, or severe potassium and magnesium depletion. Now, an important caveat. Potassium chloride is part of the treatment in the majority of metabolic alkalosis cases, but not all. When is potassium chloride not the answer? First, in mineralocorticoid excess, Conn's, Cushing's, Little's, ectopic ACTH, licorice. The alkalosis here is driven by excess mineralocorticoid activity, not by potassium or chloride depletion. The treatment is to block or remove the mineralocorticoid source. Potassium chloride only has a role if the patient is concurrently hypokalemic, and even then, it's supportive, not definitive. Second, in Calcium-Alkali syndrome, the alkalosis comes from an exogenous alkali load. Treatment is to stop the calcium and give intravenous saline. These patients are often normokalemic or even hyperkalemic from the acute kidney injury. And third, in post-hypercapnia alkalosis, when the patient is normokalemic. The kidney just needs chloride to excrete the retained bicarbonate. Normal saline alone corrects it. So remember, potassium chloride is indicated when there is concurrent hypokalemia, which is the majority of cases. But when potassium is normal and the mechanism is mineralocorticoid excess or alkali load, potassium chloride is not the answer. Thank you for joining us today. Remember, check the urine chloride. Correct the potassium. Treat the cause. See you on rounds. Read the full guidelines yourself. References are in the video description.